Thank you for joining me here on this presentation today. We are going to talk about why 4 of our biggest clients failed in this space. So we've been in the behavioral health space and healthcare in particular for over 10 years at this point, and we've seen a lot. We've worked with many of the providers in the country, and we still do. And we've had some of those providers that we no longer work with because they went bankrupt or they dissolved the company. And so we're going to talk about those clients today, and hopefully help you learn so that you do not end up in the same position. People might think it's strange. Why is a marketing company talking about clients that failed? Shouldn't that marketing company have been able to save that business? And that's one of the misconceptions that we are going to dive into, among many other things. A lot of providers, even investors sometimes, think that somehow the marketing company is going to save everything, or it's a marketing problem in general, whether you have an internal team or you're working with an outside agency. If only you could get more admissions, only you could get more intakes, everything would just work. And that's simply not the case. So, as many of you guys know, Circle Social, my company, I'm Nick Jaworski, the owner and founder of Circle Social. We're one of the largest behavioral health marketing firms in the country, and we partner with our clients. We don't really operate as a vendor. We have an entire consulting wing, as many of you know, and we work very closely. We understand call centers, we understand business development and outreach. We understand the clinical piece. We understand operations and the financial sustainability metrics that are important to any organization. So when we have clients that are struggling, or when we have clients that are looking to grow and scale, we're able to really come alongside them and give them a lot of information and advice. We've worked with over 350 facilities at this point across the country. We have billions of dollars in data. We literally bring in over 20,000 admissions a year across our clients. So we have a massive amount of data, but also because we partner with them so closely, we have a very strong ability to analyze and have a qualitative assessment of what's working and what's not working. So, what I'm going to do today is I'm going to share a lot of that experience with you and then hone in on. We're going to talk about these 4 large clients, and obviously, I'm not going to name any names here, but we are very well aware of some of the larger providers that have gone bankrupt or dissolved in the space. And of course, there are tons and tons of smaller and medium sized providers that also go out of business every day. So some of the things that we'll look at within this presentation are the larger providers. Once you start scaling past 10 facilities, so if you are in a cycle, because it is a cycle, it is a downward spiral. Once you start to get caught up in moving towards business insolvency, it's very, very hard to get out of, and it's very, very hard to see past your own organization. There are absolutely red flags to identify that cycle, and then I'm going to share different ways to try to pull yourself out of that cycle. Also, through this presentation, if you're not in that place, great. You're also going to learn a lot of things to prevent yourself from getting in that spot and how to grow sustainably and successfully without ending up in these situations that some other large providers have unfortunately found themselves in. So, with that, let's start at a 30,000 foot view, and we'll really take a look at some of the problems that providers have as they start to grow and scale past 10 facilities and past usually the 1,000 patient mark is when it starts to get pretty difficult logistically and organizationally. The biggest issue is that what worked before will not work in the future. A lot of providers try to take what I would call a lean approach to business. And it's something you hear in Silicon Valley. It's something you hear in business advice books. Double down on what's working. That actually doesn't work at different stages. So, to a point, when you see something working, you obviously want to push in that direction. You want to invest more time, more resources, more money in what's working. But you'll find that as you get to different sizes, that what worked in the past doesn't work anymore. That's as true in marketing as it is in operations, as it is in the way that you do community outreach or handle your call centers. So we'll talk about some of those different pieces. Here on the screen, you see a picture of Clayton Christensen. He was a guru of business and marketing and growth and innovation and strategy at Harvard. Unfortunately, he passed away fairly recently. But personally, he is one of the best, I think, analysts when it comes to looking at business growth. and then why leaders in the space start to fail and why leaders often lose their spot to incumbents. I wouldn't say that that's as common within the healthcare space because it's much harder to innovate and come in at a lower dollar cost margin, which is what a lot of Clayton used to look at, because a lot of reimbursement is defined by insurance, and that reimbursement doesn't have a whole lot of variability across the board. So not everything that he looks at applies, but a lot of it applies. So if you've not read this book, The Innovator Solution, it is phenomenal. He does an excellent job of digging into common business cycles and bankruptcy cycles where everyone was doing everything right. Everything was working so well, and then it started to fall apart. So how do you recognize at the beginning of the end? One of the first things that happens when providers start to find themselves in this situation is heavy investments leading to capital constraints. A lot of this is fueled by private equity. A lot of this is fueled by a false sense of success or security. So what we'll see happen is we go from one facility to three. That's a little bit of a challenge. It's definitely a change. You start to have more headquarters and centralized operations. But where we really start to see problems is when providers go from 3 to 10, or they want to go from 10 to 20. And most of the time, one of the best pieces of advice I can give you is to not go so fast, especially in healthcare. It's very complex, it's very service oriented. There are a lot of moving pieces. And so the foundation of your organization across business units is essential to keep stable. Many providers, they start to rapidly expand, rapidly grow, rapidly open up facilities. And instead of opening up one facility every 6 months, suddenly they're opening up one facility a month. That is completely unsustainable. We've never seen it work. And we've had many, many clients try. We try to caution them in the beginning, but there's often a lot of pressure or there's overconfidence because, hey, we grew to 50 facilities. Surely we can scale to 100 within the next 2 years. Highly unlikely. We've never seen it happen. So most of our providers, they definitely start to get into hot water when they grow too fast. And again, that tends to have a certain private equity or investment drive because of the shorter timelines. But we see it just as often with those that do not have sponsors behind them to support that growth. So as you expand rapidly, you have a lot of capital outlays. And then there's additional costs that you weren't aware of. Hey, now we need to build a more sophisticated call center. Now we have to get a better EMR in place or a better CRM. Now we need to get Salesforce for our sales team and our call center, and we're spending $200,000-$300,000 extra a year. All these costs add up, and they add up quickly. And so when you become capital constrained, that's when people start to make really bad decisions. So what are some other factors that lead to the capital constraints? Top heavy headquarters is really common, especially within the behavioral health space. So the thesis is, especially when you're private equity backed, if we invest in this centralized headquarters and we get an executive team and we centralize marketing, we centralize back office operations, we centralize billing, that this will create a cost savings for us that will allow us to scale. And it's also going to build out the infrastructure. As we're talking, we want to build infrastructure and we want to do it well. So if we invest in infrastructure now, once we are at the 20 facilities or the 50 facilities or whatever our goal is, that HQ is going to pay for itself. And this usually doesn't happen. The reason is within healthcare, headquarter costs are not overly scalable. Your cost per acquisition on the marketing front stays pretty stable even when you get larger. A lot of that's because healthcare is local. So you get a brand effect and you get a reputation effect within your local markets that you operate in. But if I'm in Chicago and I open up a facility in Denver, there is absolutely no value from a marketing standpoint. My name and my reputation does not transfer from Chicago to Denver. So there's no ability to really scale marketing in that sense. You're not driving any economies of scale. You're not saving any money. Your cost per acquisition is just going to be high. It's actually going to be higher in your new markets because you have no reputation there. So marketing doesn't scale. Back office doesn't really scale either. As you need to open more facilities, you need more staff, you need more support, you need more HR, you need more recruiting. Obviously, you have more patients, and so you have more reimbursements coming in that you need to get solved. And so you have to scale your billing department. So top heavy HQ is the wrong move. You actually want to scale HQ slowly and in pace with the business. as there's a need for those roles. So don't put the cart before the horse. Don't start to invest in roles in the assumption of growth. You actually want to invest in the roles as you need them. Obviously, give yourself a little bit of lead time, but you don't want to be heavily invested in a huge capital outlays before you're ready. Huge problem within the behavioral health space in particular is geographic and logistical complexity. So, for whatever reason, there are some historical trends we can talk about, but a lot of providers open up across the country. This is absolutely the wrong direction to take. A lot of people will look at like UHS or Acadia as a model and just emphasize UHS and Acadia both haven't made a profit in 10 years. Yes, are they buying more facilities sometimes? Does it look like they're growing? Technically, yeah, but they're literally making $0. And so UHS and Acadia are not good models to look at when we look at what other providers are doing to be successful. And this is the case a lot in behavioral health as well. I mean, if we look at some of the large providers that have gone bankrupt that we're all aware of, a lot of people look to them as a model. They thought, oh my goodness, they're so great, they're successful, they're building, they're growing, everyone knows their name in the industry. And then suddenly, a year later, you find out that they're filing for bankruptcy or they're laying off massive amounts of staff. This is really, really common in our space. And one of these reasons is because of the geographic and logistic complexity. Organizing and managing from afar is very difficult. You need different systems, you need different processes, you need more expensive ones. The hiring environment is different. The licensing requirements are different. The reimbursement landscape is completely different. So some providers will go where they think the reimbursements are going to be the best. Why did they go from Chicago to Denver? Because someone heard or someone researched that Denver had good reimbursement rates. This is a terrible reason to open another facility. You would think that you could take your model in Chicago and plop it down in Denver. This is absolutely not the case. There are certain repeatable things that you can do when opening up a de novo facility or acquiring someone else's. But for the most part, it's a very, very different environment that will add logistical challenges and most providers are not able to successfully overcome. I often like to give the example of granite recovery. And so when you look at granite recovery, regardless of what you think of those operations or what you think about them as a provider, they did a phenomenal job of growing an amazingly successful, and I can tell you, very financially successful on the back end business just in New Hampshire, one of the smallest states in the country. And they built one of the most successful businesses, which the largest top line and bottom line revenue out of almost any provider in the country. They did it just in New Hampshire. Regionalization is a primary key to success that you want to be looking at to avoid getting into one of these downward spirals. Obviously, as people start to have massive capital outlays, they start to grow their debt, they lack cash reserves. So this is standard part of operating a business, especially for private equity back. We're debt heavy, we want to grow, we're going to invest for that growth, and hopefully the payoff comes later. Lots of financial reasons that makes sense. In healthcare, it really doesn't. Part of it is the logistical complexity of expanding geographically, like I talked about. Part of it, as we'll talk about soon, is just growing too fast and all the problems and challenges that come with growing quicker than you are currently internally capable of doing. And then the last piece is just the unknown. I wouldn't call them black swan events. That's not accurate because they're pretty common, but things like payer clawbacks, things like regulation changes, things like the government coming in, doing an audit and shutting you down for a couple months as you have to get back on track with some kind of licensing plan, right? These things are very common in healthcare and they cost a ton of money. If United comes to you or Cigna comes to you and says, hey, we're not going to pay you for the next 6 months to 12 months. And on top of that, we want 4, 10, $15 million back because we believe you billed inappropriately. Where is that money going to come from? You really need to have a safety net because the reimbursement process is so long sometimes within healthcare. And it's not uncommon to have situations where you either have a sudden massive expense or you're just not getting paid. I mean, sometimes Blue Cross Blue Shield just won't pay, and better just won't pay. And it's going to take you 6 months to get paid. Well, you have to be able to operate and then still invest in growth at the same time during those points. And so, really, really important to just have cash reserves. Number of trends that challenge providers. These are things that I think we're all very familiar with at this point. Definitely things that we've been talking about for 5, 6, 7 years now. Uh, the shift from out of network to in network has definitely occurred. Some providers still actually haven't gotten the message, but the vast majority have. And there's shrinking reimbursement all around. And so, what's really important here is to understand that this isn't changing. So, going back to one of the things that providers make mistakes on is, again, they think the past is going to be like the future. And in healthcare, that is rarely the case. If you're starting to see a network become a trend, that is going to become the norm very quickly. And so the answer is not to double down on what you were doing for out of network, right? I was running a lot of Google ads and I was getting a bunch of patients at a super high CPA, but we got reimbursed enough to cover it. It was profitable. So we just need to find more of those out of network patients and shift our Google ads campaigns to find them. Absolutely wrong. What you need to do is figure out how to move your business in network and then shift the cost structure down so that in network is profitable. There's this cycle of trying to believe that what worked in the past is going to work again. Sometimes it's overconfidence. Like, look, I built this business. It's doing really well. Now it's not, right? And it's not because people aren't doing their jobs. It's not because your marketing is not working or your call center is not taking the right calls or handling it right. Sometimes those are factors, but a lot of times it's because of a dynamic shift in the business landscape, and providers aren't prepared for it. They're too focused on what worked in the past, not focused on what the trends are changing in the future. Talked about unsustainable company structure, still an issue for a lot of providers. A lot of providers are trying to run a cost per bed per day that is just not sustainable with the insurance negotiated rates that they have. And so then people look for value-based care and try to get more from the insurance payers. Probably not going to happen at scale. What you really want to do is you want to look at your market, the customers and patients that you're serving. What is the biggest payer or the biggest couple payers in your market, and what do they reimburse at an average rate? That's what should determine your cost structure. So if you're trying to fix your business model by somehow getting more patients or getting more money, you're fighting upstream and you're not going to win. You need to say, okay, Anthem is paying X amount of dollars. My current cost per bed day is Y. So how do I get my cost per bed per day below what Anthem's willing to pay me with our average length of stay? Does that work out financially? If the answer is no, you need to figure out a new cost model and you need to figure out where you need to cut costs. That could be your cost per admission because you're using a ton of Google ads. Google ads are ridiculously expensive and not sustainable for in network contracts at scale, right? 10% of your admissions can come from Google ads. That's sustainable across most providers, even at scale. But once you start having more than 10% of your admissions coming from Google ads, you're not going to be profitable at in-network reimbursement rates. It's absolutely not going to happen. And so that's a big shift. Now you have to go into other marketing channels that you're not familiar with and that are not as clear as Google ads. Google ads are very final attribution. See a click, see a call, see an admission. I feel comfortable. I can track it. It's all there. That doesn't happen with TV. That doesn't happen with Facebook. That doesn't happen with X. That doesn't happen with direct mail or radio. These are all long-term build channels that require the provider to be able to put a 3 to 6 month outlay into their marketing with no super clear direct feedback loop in terms of admissions. Are there leading indicators that you can track in terms of traffic and calls and engagement? 100%. Those leading indicators are very important to be watching, but you're not going to see the admissions anywhere near as quickly as you do with something like Google Ads. And so that becomes a big challenge for providers. It's a big shift that a lot of them don't know how to make. Another big shift in the industry is the shift from destination to local. Again, I think we're all familiar with this at this point, but at the end of the day, people do not want to travel for treatment. I've said it a million times. We've got all of the data. We've got tens of thousands of admissions a year that we're bringing in. People do not come from more than 150 miles away for residential. They do not come more than 30 miles away for IOP or higher level outpatient levels of care. It's very, very important for you to understand that you're limited by the radius in which you operate. Are there a handful of really high-end providers that can attract people from across the country? Yes, that is a completely different kind of marketing and outreach than someone trying to bring in the average Joe with an in-network commercial private policy that they're able to take in their facility. Individuals want to be local. Very important. And so make sure that when you're thinking about your strategy, you're thinking about building a reputation locally, marketing locally, doing outreach locally. How do you work within the radius? And that has effects on the total volume that can come into a particular facility or set of facilities. If you have a lot of competition in the market and everyone's going for the same 150-mile radius as a residential provider or a 30-mile radius as like an IOP, that makes it very challenging because there's only a certain number of patients that are going to come from that area in any given month. It's not like there's an infinite number of patients out there. I mean, that's one of the wrong theses that a lot of providers make. They think that there's all these patients that are just untapped, right? That somehow we're just not reaching them. They really want care. They want to come into treatment, but they haven't heard of us or they didn't search Google yet. Or if we could just get in front of them, they'll come in. Absolutely wrong. I've said it many numbers of times. The number of people that want to come to treatment versus who might qualify under an SUD diagnosis is less than 7%. It's a really small number, especially once you get into narrowing that down for commercial insurance. An even smaller number. Then you narrow it down again for the people that want higher levels of care. Most people don't want to go into residential. Most people want a one-on-one therapist once a week. They're going to start there, or they're going to go to an AA meeting. It's not until they've reached a certain point that they're willing to look at a really expensive, really time-intensive level of care like residential. So understand your radius. Understand that there's been a shift from low to supply to oversupply. Again, I think this should be obvious to most providers at this point, but I still come across providers that don't quite understand it. Back in the day, it was easy to get calls. I mean, man, we would turn on a Google Ads campaign, we would turn on a Facebook campaign, and the phone would just start ringing off the hook because no one had anywhere to go. Right? If you lived in Philadelphia, you couldn't find treatment. If you lived in New York, you couldn't find treatment. If you live in Chicago, you couldn't find treatment. So you were flying down to Florida, you were flying over to California because that was the only place where treatment centers existed. But nowadays, there's treatment centers everywhere. We'll look at an example later, but if you pull up a Google map of treatment centers around you, just search for addiction treatment or drug rehab or therapy or mental health treatment near me, and you will literally have 20 providers pop up within a 20 to 30-mile radius. The competition is immense at this point. And so that's a very significant dynamic that has shifted, that has driven a lot of stress and a lot of failure for providers that they've not been able to adapt. So at first, we got all the volume, right? We opened up a campaign, we did our search engine optimization, we did our marketing. Anyone that wanted treatment found us because we were the only provider in town, or there weren't enough providers across the country. And so the kind of same thing was happening from a destination treatment model. That's not the case anymore. They're finding treatment everywhere, everywhere. And so you don't get all the volume. You have to fight for that volume. You have to market better for that volume. You have to build a better program and build a better reputation for that volume. So it's a very, very different environment than it used to be. And then, of course, there's the capital outlays and logistical complexity of full continuums of care. Back in the day, it was very easy to just open a detox or just open an IOP or just a residential. And those days are pretty much gone. Obviously, we still see people trying it, but it is very, very challenging to not have a full continuum because that's what patients want, that's what the payers want. And frankly, from a reimbursement standpoint, you need the ongoing revenue. You need the incremental revenue that comes with each step down level of care. Residential is really hard to make work if all you're providing is residential, especially as we see length of stay get slashed or become more challenging to get approved. Even if you're getting them approved, you have to invest in more UR, and that UR has a cost to it. And so there's additional cost to getting that approved and driving revenue from those sources, regardless of whether it's the right thing for the patient or not. I mean, we know that longer lengths of stay are probably better for most patients, but that's not going to change the billing realities that we live in and the reimbursement realities that we live in. So we have to make sure that we are looking at a full continuum to be able to get the revenue we need to be successful and sustainable. That means a full continuum, not one level of care. So that brings us to this downward spiral. All of these pressures are here. And so what we see at the executive level really consistently, I say we, but I can speak personally. I'm often in the meetings with the board. I'm often in the meetings with the executives, and we go through this high pressure, no time cycle. And so what happens is we're running out of money. We have a 6 month runway, a 7 month runway left. We have to figure out a way to be profitable. And maybe it's not that urgent, but there's a lot of pressure from the investors, or we're putting a lot of pressure on ourselves to right this ship and correct some of these challenges and some of these trends that are putting headwinds in place for us. So, how do we do that? Well, try going to the board, try going to your investors and saying, here's my plan. It's going to take $4 million in 6 months, and I think we'll be fine. That is a very hard plan to get approved. People are saying we're already losing money. It already looks like we're going to lose the ability to continue doing this business. And you want $4 million in 6 months? No way, right? We're not going to approve that plan. How do you know it's going to work? How do we know that after 2 months, if it doesn't work, do we even have the money or the time to shift gears? So what happens is most people don't put a plan like that together. What most people do is say, what can I change today that will save our business in 2 to 4 weeks? And I hate to say it, but it's a nonsense answer. It is the answer that is the most common that you will see people try to come up with, but it is nonsense. There's no way that you have a broken business model or a business model that is not going to be as successful within the current dynamics of the market environment, and you're going to somehow turn that around in 2 to 4 weeks. It's not going to happen. Not only that, but your previous data is not overly valuable because the dynamics have changed and your market has changed. So now the information I was relying on to make decisions is no longer as valid. It can't give me the direction and insight that I need to make this future growth path. And so this is one area that we come in oftentimes and we can really help providers because we've seen it all, right? We've seen people make the mistakes. We've seen people do the successful tactics and metrics that have allowed them to grow. We've been part of a lot of those journeys. And so we can say, hey, look, don't go this way because most of the time that fails. Go this way. But the challenge is they've never been there, right? Most executives, most investors, they're overseeing one, maybe they've had a couple bigger treatment providers in their lifetime. And so they don't have the experience to be able to say, okay, I'm very confident in the direction we're going here. Because again, I've seen 15 times that this method didn't work. Well, we've seen it. We know for a fact that going in that direction is not going to work. But the executives or the investors don't, right? And they've done a good job trusting their gut, right? They're CEOs, they're high level investors, they're private equity firms. And so they've gotten very far by trusting their gut in the past. It's very hard for them not to trust their gut in the future, especially when the business used to be successful. So then that's the challenge we get into is they feel this pressure and they feel this unconscious desire to turn things around quickly. They know that it used to work in the past. If they could just get to work again, it will work. And that's not the case. So part of my job and our job is to convince people and say, hey, look, don't trust your gut on this. Don't trust your past data. It's not going to get you where you need to go because what worked before is not going to work for you now. That's a big ask. It's a big ask for all of the people putting the pressure on the team to get better. So this creates a downward spiral. All this pressure, and it becomes myopic, becomes focused on the past, and it becomes focused on a short-term turnaround. And so how that becomes a downward spiral is that short-termism doesn't work. So really easy example that I'm sure we'll come back to later is Google Ads. Google Ads worked for certain people for a long time. Why? It's a ridiculously expensive CPA. Very, very expensive. It will cost you thousands of dollars to get an admission with the Google ad. But again, when I was getting 30, 40, 50, $60,000 a month for a patient, who cares? That was a viable CPA. I could afford that cost per admission, no problem. Now I'm getting $12,500 a month. And not only that, went from a 28-day length of stay to a 15-day length of stay. So that cost is now unsustainable. So you can't go back to Google Ads and say, okay, we just have to do better here and get more admissions like we used to because it's the wrong approach. Again, your previous data, your previous tactics are not going to save you. But what happens is I walk into these meetings and say, we need more admissions. And I say, okay, well, we have a couple options. We can invest in Facebook. We can invest in collaboration with the business development team. We can invest in LinkedIn. We can invest in TV. And these are going to start bringing our admissions up within 3 to 6 months. And everyone looks at me and they say, that's too long. We can't do that. It's the same thing like you go to the board with a $4 million plan for a 6 month turnaround. Nobody's going to give you that time. So they say, well, what could we do in 2 to 4 weeks? You say, well, we can spend more money on Google Ads and we can guarantee that you're going to get a couple more admissions, right? You can't just turn things on a dime. Google Ads is not some kind of machine that you push a button, you put money in and you get patients out, right? That's not how it works. If you've been really paying attention to your Google Ads, there's a lot of volatility, sometimes up to 50% month over month. That's just part of how Google Ads works. And we'll talk about why that is later. But that's what they come back with is, okay, look, I'll just give you another $50,000, put it into Google Ads, let's get more admissions. What happens? We get a couple more admissions, but we're still not profitable. And the business still is not turning around. And so now we have even less money and less runway. And so now the board and investors are even angrier and there's more pressure. And they say, we got to fix this. And so we end up in the conversation again. We say, okay, well, we can do the Facebook, we can do LinkedIn, we can do the TV, and it'll take us 3 to 6 months. Oh, it's too long. We can't do that. What can we do now? Well, we could throw more money into Google Ads and we could get a couple patients out of it, but it's not going to be profitable. Oh, let's try and make it work. We used to work before. And so that cycle just continues down and down and down. I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in having that exact same conversation month over month until the provider goes bankrupt or they just shut things down because it's not viable anymore. So that's just an example, but that's happening across the organization at different levels. What can we do now? What can we do today to fix things tomorrow? And so you make a short-term decision and a bad investment that's not sustainable. And not only that, but you choose not to invest in the right decision, which is the long-term one, where you've got to have a thesis, you've got to have a vision, you've got to commit to it as an organization. Is there a chance it's not going to work? Your $4 million plan with a 6 month timeline? Yeah, there is a chance it's not going to work. But I can tell you for a fact that it's a much higher probability that that's going to save you, because I can tell you your chance of saving the business with a short term turnaround in 2 to 4 weeks is zero. You have zero chance of saving that business in 2 to 4 weeks. You have to be gutsy to make the investment for the long term. And it's just really, really hard to do. So we're talking about this, right? Pressure mounts, while the capital erodes, the timeline erodes, becomes pressure, pressure, pressure. We get into this downward cycle. So we get really focused on short-termism. That short-termism drives the downward cycle. It's a huge problem. One of the challenges at large organizations is being CEO-led versus owner-led. Again, same situation, right? The CEO can always go to a new job. At the end of the day, they don't have this need to save the business. You don't want a failure on your record. And obviously, every CEO I know takes their responsibility very seriously and they really care about their organization and they want to do right by it. But again, they can't go to the board with a $4 million plan in 6 months. And so they go to the board with the politically savvy plan of 1 to 2 month turnaround. We had a large contract with a large provider and we were working with them, working on expanding that contract. Same thing happened. Capital starts to erode. And suddenly we're in this conversation. We say, well, what can we do to turn this around? I say, here's a plan. It's going to take 12 months and we have to do all these different things. And here's the investments that we have to make. And the answer was 12 months. We can't do that. We're talking to this other provider over here, this other agency, and they said we can just spend a bunch of money and in 2 months we'll be fine. I said, that can't happen. I said, I've been here so many times, it won't happen. And so exactly, and this was like 7 months ago. So now, of course, that provider's calling us again and say, it didn't work. It didn't work. What do we do? Now you're in this situation. Pressure is even heavier. Timeline is more reduced. We have less capital available. And my answer is still the same. Here's your 12-month timeline to turn this business around because this is what needs to happen. This is how long it's going to take. And you can make that investment or you can throw stuff against the wall again and hope and pray. And hope is not a strategy, though we often want it to be. So anyway, it's much harder for a hired CEO to have these conversations and take the gutsy move because they're just as likely to get fired for it, right? The provider will say, okay, well, you didn't turn things around in 2 months, you're out. And that happens all the time, right? The average CEO, lifespan of an average CEO is like 1 to 2 years in a lot of bigger companies. And so they're just trying to do right by the organization, but also obviously you have a certain level of protectionism. You want to keep your job. It's important to you. Being a CEO is not easy. You're not going to find a job next door. You got to move across the country. You got to move your family. There's a lot of problems with that. So as an owner, it's much easier. Owner, you got your own capital invested, and so you're going to make that gutsy decision. And yes, there's a chance it might fail, but you know that what you're doing now isn't working. So that's not an option. Doing more of the same is not going to fix the business. So you take the risk, and our owner-led providers are most likely to be successful in these situations. So I just bring up these dynamics because if you're going through this or if you're thinking about it, this is really what you want to think about. As an investment crew, are we putting the pressure on our hired CEO so that they're making bad decisions and we're forcing them to make bad decisions? Are we giving them the runway that they need with the plan that makes sense? Or are we forcing them into the short term downward spiral? And are you going to take the risk on that, right? Because it might require another raise from you. It might require some additional capital to get to that hump, and that's a risk. So these are standard opportunities and costs that you have to weigh, standard risk profile of running a company. But my personal advice is you need to come up with the long-term plan and put that into place. Doesn't mean that there aren't short-term changes. I mean, we find little things all the time. We get obviously called in a lot of time when things are going bad. People don't call in a consulting company or a marketing company so often when things are going great. They tend to call us in when something's going wrong. And so we can come in and say, okay, look, your call center, your conversion rate's terrible. We need to do call training. That'll give us a 20% increase in admissions right there. Or your Google Ads campaigns are terrible. You're paying 10 grand as a CPA. You should be paying half that. Let's fix that. That'll also double our admissions, at least from that channel, right? So there are certain short-term things that you can do, and that gives you a little bit more of a runway. So I'm not saying that there aren't any short-term options, but most of the time, the short-term options are a piece of the puzzle. They're not enough to solve all of it. And so you have to think long term. And what are we doing short term? What are we doing medium term? What are we doing long term? How do we get to that sustainable level within this new dynamic? It's a lot. Most people focus on the front door, by which I mean intakes and admissions, to the exclusion of all else. And they get obsessed with it. They get obsessed with it on a short term level. I mean, we've had large clients where we literally have weekly conversations on the number of admissions they're getting in. Between last week and this week, what can you do to change your business and drive 20% more admissions? The answer is nothing. There's absolutely nothing you can do to go from 800 admissions last week to 1,000 admissions this week. Will never happen. And so why are you having a weekly meeting on admissions? It is a complete waste of time. What you can do is you can have a weekly meeting on the progress we're making against the 6-month plan. Now that makes sense, right? We're starting to invest in this. What are we seeing happen? Are we seeing engagement? Are we seeing traffic? Are we seeing the staff take the right actions? Are we starting to see a shift in their conversion rates, right? It's not going to happen overnight, but we can start to track to see the progress, and then we can get granular with it. So let's take the call team as an easy example. Is the call team admission conversion rate improving, week over week? Maybe not, but are individual call reps improving week over week? You can probably start to see some of that. And then as we start to identify certain call reps that are improving, can we focus on the ones that aren't improving as quickly? And what can we do to support them? And then we start to see the overall call conversion rate improve. And that happens, within a month, 2 months, it gets better. There's things that we can look at and track that we would consider leading indicators that are very, very helpful. And you do the same thing from a marketing standpoint, you do the same thing from an outreach standpoint. An outreach metric is, are they touching base with more people more often? Or are they touching base with the right people more often? Because running around and talking to everyone is not going to change your business, but talking to the right people strategically with focus, intention, and a certain amount of frequency and repetition is very valuable. We're running the Google Ads campaigns on the marketing side, but what are we seeing as we add Facebook into the mix? What are we seeing as we add TV into the mix? Are we getting more traffic to the website? Are we getting more branded traffic specifically to the website? Is that happening week over week, month over month? If it is, we know we're on the right approach. Maybe we're not seeing the admissions needle move that much yet, but we are seeing these other leading indicators. And so that's worth having a meeting on week over week. But having a meeting on admissions week over week is a complete waste of time. You should be having admissions meetings month over month at the most frequent. Month over month is really what you want to look at. And really, I tell providers look at it quarterly because obviously you should be checking in month over month, but quarterly gives you a better read because of the seasonality that's really common and the volatility with a lot of channels. I mean, there's a million reasons why Google Ads might bring you in 100 admissions this month and 80 next month. Super common. Same thing with your BD team. Does your BD rep bring in 5 admissions every month like clockwork? No, sometimes they bring in 2, sometimes they bring in 10, right? There's a lot of variables that drive that. You can work to reduce some of that volatility, but it's just going to be a dynamic of healthcare that you can't change. So stop obsessing about your admissions when you're in this situation or when you're trying to grow. You want to have a read on it. You want to get the data. You want to be tracking it. But you want to think about what a reasonable timeline is for that. The example is I grew up in Wisconsin, and if you look at home sales from October to March, which is half the year, that's 6 months, it's meaningless data. Why? You got 6 months of data. Why is it meaningless? Because nobody sells their home in the winter in Wisconsin. Everyone sells their home in the spring, summer, and fall. So they sell their homes from April to September. So if I got 6 months of data in the winter, it's completely meaningless. That is the exact same problem that you have when you're looking at admissions data week over week. It's just noise. There is no smoking gun in that data. There is nothing that's going to tell you what to do. But you know what people do is they stare at it. They stare at it. Oh, we should probably change the geographies we're targeting. We should change keywords. We should throw a bunch of money at this channel. We should revamp all of our landing pages, right? No, no. The weekly data is just noise. There is nothing in it that is telling you what is broken or what's working. You need to give it at least a month, and then you can have a real conversation, say, did this work or did this not work? And again, you can look at your leading indicators, but for the most part, you should look at month over month. So stop focusing on the front door. We'll talk about what to focus on throughout the rest of this presentation. Again, we covered this already. Tunnel vision, get obsessed with the front door, get obsessed with meaningless data, just noise. You have to get beyond that. You have to understand what's important, what are the metrics you should be watching, and what's the right frequency of watching those metrics. Again, if I'm selling homes in Wisconsin, I need a year of data, a year of data. And that's really true in a lot of ways for providers because of seasonality, right? Your holiday seasons are wackier, they're lower than other times of the year. Your summers are much lower, especially for teens. Very common to have a lot less admissions in the summer. You ramp up from January to May. You ramp up in September, October. These are traditional seasonality trends. Do they hold firm every single year? There's a little variance, right? Some providers buck a trend now and then, but it's just more random noise, right? To say this provider over here did really great in December, while everyone else did poorly. Did that provider that did great do something differently? Usually no. The answer is that most of the time it's just noise in the data. There's a certain amount of random variability. They got on the outlier end of that spectrum for that year. The previous year they were low. The next year they'll be low. It was just a random fluctuation. So you have to be careful with the data sets that you're looking at and how you're comparing yourself to it, and realizing that there's always outliers in any data set, and that's random variance. It's not necessarily related to causal factors. Sometimes it is. No, it's not saying don't talk to them, don't see if they got some secret sauce you can't figure out. But at the end of the day, what I tell providers is we've seen everything under the sun and we've tried everything under the sun. We know the secret sauce. If what we're doing isn't working, there's something else fundamentally that's a problem, right? That we've got to figure out. It could be a market dynamic. It could be the reputation that you have in the community. It could be the fact that you've turned over your BD reps 5 times in the past 2 years. There's a lot of things that go into why things were working and then aren't working now. And so you really have to dig into it. But you don't want to be grasping at meaningless data in time frequencies that are too frequent. Mentioned, dynamic, unstable term for patient volume. Simple example here. Let's say that I'm a hospital provider and I depend on car crash is for our revenue. I need people to get into car crashes. I'm going to help them or make sure that they're alive, that they're safe, that they're better. How many car crashes do you have in a given month? Do you have the same number of car crashes every month? Absolutely not, right? When do you have more car crashes? Probably in the summer when everyone's hitting the road for summer road trips. Probably during spring break. When do you have lower car crashes? Probably spring, outside of spring break, where people are traveling less. There are factors that are going to drive the number of car crashes that happen in a given month. The same is exactly true for depression, for anxiety, for substance use and addiction. It's just unstable patient volume. And we see this very clearly in the search engine optimization and the Google Ads data and the marketing data. I mean, just yesterday I was looking at trends in teen data. If you look at people searching for teen rehab from 2021 to today, it is just a downward trend of people searching for teen rehab. For whatever reason, people are searching for it less and less. So that means that there's a less demand for teen rehab, especially on the SUD side. Now, on the mental health side, if you look at teens or teen mental health therapy, that's going up. There's a higher demand for that. So there's always changes in consumer need and dynamic factors and search behavior. And well, again, we'll talk about this in a little bit, but there's only so much search that's happening in a given month. There's only so many people that need treatment. If you've got other competitors in the marketplace, they're going to get a share of that. You're going to get a share of that. How do you get the bigger share? That's all part of these things that we're covering here. But there is no fail safe for you to just get the same number of patients or more patients every single month. It's very, very hard to do. You can grow, but you have to do it right. You have to do it with a stable foundation. And most of the time, it's steady growth. That's what I like to tell providers. Again, you shouldn't go from opening one facility every 6 months to one a month. Terrible idea. You're just going to blow up and it's going to fail. Now, can you go from opening one facility every 6 months to one every 3 months? Yeah, that's probably reasonable. Are you opening one facility a month and you want to up that to two? Okay, give it a try, see what happens. But should you go from one facility a month to three? No, it's a terrible idea, right? Now you're talking about having an additional 24 facilities in a year that you don't have experience handling and managing and all the problems that come with scale. Because again, what worked yesterday is not going to work today at different size levels. So very, very important to keep in mind. All right, let's get to some specific business units of reasons that we've had clients fail, go bankrupt, dissolve, whatever. Business development is one of the most common reasons that providers will fail. The first thing we see as people start to scale is to say, hey, my business development reps are bringing in 6 admissions a month, 8 admissions a month. So all we need is more business development reps. Super logical, except it doesn't work. And the reason it doesn't work is because either you hire them too close to each other, so they're tripping over each other and they're fighting for communications and there's breakdowns and all the stuff that happens with reps. So you can't have them too close together. You really have to plan your territories correctly and accurately. And that's not just geographically, right? It's about the volume that's in a given area. If a certain radius around a rep's house has 3 hospitals and another rep has no hospitals in their radius, that completely changes the dynamic and the touch points that you have to have. So from a territory standpoint, you really want to think about the community referral partners that exist within a rep's particular territory, how many they are, how big they are, how likely they are to refer, all that kind of stuff, and do that strategically. So one, you want to think through strategically, make sure you got the right reps in the right places, make sure they're not tripping over each other. But the biggest problem that we see is hiring too many reps. So they'll start to hire reps 200 miles away, 300 miles away, right? You're a provider in California, you're hiring reps in Colorado. Do you know how many providers there are in Colorado? There are hundreds. There's absolutely no reason for me living in Denver to go to California for treatment. Does it mean that you might get some onesie twosies? And that's also something that drives me absolutely nuts. I'll often ask providers, I'm like, well, do you have people come from other states? They're like, oh, yeah, of course. We definitely have people come from other states. Well, last year, how many people did you have come from another state? Oh, we had like 3 or 4. Oh, great. So you served 800 patients last year and you saw 4 from out of state. What does that tell you? Right. So we don't want to go after the really difficult, hard to convert, hard to convince to travel crowd. We want to go to people that are near us. And so in our data, it's super clear. Once you get outside for a residential, once you get outside a 150-mile radius for a business development rep, they can bring in a third less admissions Are there exceptions? Of course. Someone has a great relationship with the hospital, or someone's really involved with airline pilots, right? There are certain situations where that will work. But again, it's a minority and they are exceptions. They are not the rule. So you want to keep your reps within a 150-mile radius. Now, you got two things. You want to keep them within a 150-mile radius and you don't want them tripping over each other. And obviously, they have to be where people are. You can't hire a rep in the middle of rural Indiana and hope that they're going to bring in a bunch of patients. So that creates a volume restriction. And this is important to understand that your reps can only bring in a certain amount of volume based on the number of referral sources they have in that community and the number of patients that are potentially looking for treatment within their territory. That is a set volume that changes month over month, right? It's not stable. Uh, but you can't grow beyond that. So it's not like, let's say we have 10 reps in a particular 150-mile radius. Hiring 11 is not going to get us a ton more patients in the door, right? There are diminishing returns because of the volume of that channel based on geographic restrictions and the dynamics of reps being on top of each other. So you can't grow and scale by just hiring a bunch of reps. And this is the problem with every single marketing channel. Every single marketing channel has a certain amount of volume in a geographic area. And so you can't scale beyond it. You will absolutely always get diminishing returns just for logical reasons, right? You can't scale a particular tactic to the moon, right? I can't get compound interest and have a company that grows at 20% a year, year over year for 500 years. It's literally impossible, right? Statistically, you will have a company that controls the entire world by compounding that much. No such thing. You're always going to have some kind of natural limit based on consumer size, based on market share, based on the residents that live in the area. So we want to think through this strategically, and reps are no different than Google Ads or Facebook or TV. There's a certain set of volume in the geographic area that limits it. Okay, so another big mistake that we've happened is reps are always out there doing their own thing. They're hired. There's no training besides maybe here's how the CRM works. Go figure out how to connect patients to care. Complete waste of time, right? You're just burning money, and then they start to blame them for the reps. It's not the reps' fault. You didn't really set them up for success. All these challenges. You have to integrate what the reps are doing with marketing and obviously with clinical, which we'll also talk about. They need support. They need good materials. They need good collateral. They need help with event setup. They need help with marketing those events. They need help with event registration. They need help with conferences. They need help with sponsorships. They need help with LinkedIn support. They need help with Facebook support. All of these things make your reps more successful. And so if you provide them the resources that they need in terms of team support across departments, that is going to allow them to be much more successful. 10 to 20% more referrals and admissions per month when you are correctly supporting your business development team rather than having it operate in a complete silo. So you want to definitely integrate marketing with outreach. You have to train your reps. Most reps don't know what they're doing. This is a common misconception that people that have been working in the industry for 10 years somehow really know what they're doing. And that's really hit or miss. And the reason is because no one's ever bothered to train them. What most providers do is say, hey, we're going to hire you. How many patients do you think you can bring in? Oh, you said you brought in 20 a month at the last place. Great, we'll hire you, right? And that's about the extent of these interviews. They bring them in, and then they say, go do that thing. Go find that 20 people that you were finding for the other provider. And then they can't, and they don't, and they fail, and they get fired, and the whole cycle starts over again. So because that's the cycle, that's literally what this has been their experience. They don't know how to get into a hospital. They don't know how to talk to one. They don't know how to talk to a private psychologist or a therapist. They don't know how to schedule their time. So how much time do you spend and how many touch points do you need with a hospital versus a private psychologist versus a union? They have no idea. That actually needs to be expertise that your organization has that you train them on. And that's a big ask, I know, because we do a lot of business development training. Most providers don't have that internal expertise, right? The director of business development oftentimes is coming from the same background as people that had no training in the past. And so they are generally living off of relationships, right? They got hired into a director of business development role, not because they know what they're doing, they're good at training, but they just happen to have a lot of relationships. and those relationships were managed well, and that led to a certain amount of referrals, et cetera, et cetera. So it looked like they were doing a good job. Surely they can manage a team, and that's often incorrect. They really have to know how to train that team, how to support someone that's a newbie, how to support someone with limited expertise. How do I get into a hospital? Who do I talk to? When do I talk to them? What do they need? What's different about talking to a hospital than talking to a private psychologist, than talking to a union, than talking to a nonprofit, than talking to another treatment center? These are all different conversations, and they also need different support for different marketing tactics. A good director of business development is going to work with marketing and say, hey, the hospitals, I need this collateral. For private psychologists, I need this collateral. For the unions, I need this collateral. And here's a support marketing campaign, or here's a support event that we should be running. All this stuff is really, really important to be integrated. Most providers don't do it. Big problem that we'll keep referencing throughout this presentation, lack of program-specific knowledge. So going back to the comment I made about 20 providers being in an area, that's everywhere, right? You can't go anywhere in the country except maybe some rural town in the middle of nowhere where there aren't 20 providers around you. Each one of those providers has a business development rep, and each one of those is sending them to the hospital, sending them to the unions, sending them to the therapists. So why in the world is that hospital going to refer to you and not the 19 other competitors that are doing the exact same thing? Is it because you brought donuts? No. They have to know, and they care. The hospitals care, the psychologists care, the unions care. They care about results. They want to know the patients are going to a good place. And so, what is specifically good about your program that's different than everyone else? That's what they have to know. And if your program's not different, that's your number one problem, which we'll talk about later. But let's assume that your program's different. So hopefully it is. If it is different, then does your team understand what those differences are? Does it understand those differences vis-a-vis competitors? Does it understand how to communicate them appropriately to specific marketing referral sources or community referral partners? Have they sat in the program? I can't tell you how many ride-alongs I've been on with reps that have never even stepped foot inside the programs that they're representing. And somehow people are surprised that they're being successful in their jobs. So you have to understand what's different about your program. That has to be codified, communicated, and your reps have to be trained on it. And not just trained on what it is, but how to communicate it appropriately. Because again, a hospital discharge nurse thinks about that differently than a union, thinks about it differently than a tribe. So what's important to them? Lack of direction, again, a lot of it's just go out there, do your thing. That's not going to happen. This whole book of business concept is nonsense. And you think about it, if I'm a discharge nurse, right, and I've got a rep coming to me and saying, hey, I'm working for X treatment center and they're the best thing since sliced bread. They were so great. I would never work anywhere else. You have to refer to them. And then they fire to get quit and go to the next facility. And they go back to that discharge nurse and say, hey, I'm at this new facility. It is the best thing since sliced bread. You shouldn't send anyone anywhere else. Talk to me. I'll take care of the patient. Then they get fired or quit and go to the next one. And the same thing, right? This conversation keeps happening over. Well, what is a discharge nurse thing? The discharge nurse says, oh, this person is, just blowing smoke. They're not serious. They don't know what's going on. So the whole book of business concept doesn't work because referral sources don't transfer with reps. Referral sources believe and refer to good programs most of the time. Yeah, you got some treatment centers that do the buddy stuff, but for the most part, people that are referring refer to quality programming and not to a rep. And so they're not going to bring their book of business. And we've seen that again and again and again. You can't just move referral sources around. So you need to provide the team direction. You need to give them a territory. You need to give them, who they should be talking to, how often they should be talking to them. Real simple stuff. And then you have to be different, as I mentioned before. Like if there's nothing different about you, not saying that your reps can't, hustle and scramble and finagle and try to do things to, maybe pick up the phone first. Sometimes that'll help. But if they don't have anything truly different compared to the other 19 reps that are going into that same hospital, good luck. Like you're just never going to be overly successful. So differentiation is the first starting point, and then that goes into your territory assignments. How are you different? And then which providers in the community really care about that difference? Because not everyone does, right? If you have an LGBTQ program, if you're the fastest to get someone into care, if you have the best CBT program in the country, if you're really good with trauma, whatever your differentiators are, certain referral sources will value that more. And so you should be focusing your time. Mentioned it already, high turnover burns reputations. So when we look at the data in terms of what works, reps that have been with the same provider, decent reps, right? Always low performers, but decent reps that have been with the provider for over a year do 20% better the next year. And then in year two, they do 20% better than they did after the first year. And same thing for year three. So the longer a rep is with you, a decent rep, they will get better and better and better. One, because they're getting better at their job, and two, because the referral sources are getting to know and trust them more, and then getting to know you as a provider and trust you more. These things are really, really important. So when you have high rep turnover, even if you hire the best rep in the world and the person is really good, if they're the fifth rep that's going to that discharge nurse from your organization, the discharge nurse already has a huge level of distrust in your organization, regardless of how good that rep is. So you kind of start to burn your bridges the more turnover you have. So there's a negative effect, a negative downward spiral from a lot of turnover. And then there is the positive effect of keeping reps long term. And that's in 12-month periods. We've tracked it pretty closely. It's not 4 months, it's not 6 months. Obviously, you should be seeing reps improve, like from day one to month 3 to month 6. You should see them ramping up in terms of their ability to connect patients to care. But then they kind of level off. They'll level off, for another 6 months, and then kind of that year mark, they start to improve again, 20%, bringing in additional 1 or 2 admissions a month. Same thing, year 2, year 3, etc. We see it level off after 3 years. I mean, obviously, there's a limit at some point. You can't be everywhere at once. Right? You're limited by the number of people you can talk to, but very important to keep in mind. All right, so we got call center after outreach. You've got the call team, very, very important for providers, and another reason that a lot of providers fail. This is something we've seen with large clients and small, where again, they're looking at marketing, they're looking at the front door, they're saying, all we need is more calls. We can get more calls, we can get more admissions. That's absolutely not the case because your conversion rates don't stay the same based on marketing channels and the quality of the leads that you're sending from different channels and different strategies within those channels. That has a big impact and effect. But also, your call team has a hard time handling more calls. It's more and more difficult for them. Conversion rates start to drop, or competition comes in. And when competition comes in, again, you got 19 other providers in the community. Now, how many people do you know that are going to call one provider? I'm looking for mental health residential treatment program for my son who's 17. Am I going to call one place and just say that's good? There's absolutely no way. I'm going to shop around. I'm going to look at a bunch of websites. I'm going to call a bunch of providers. I'm going to choose the best one, especially if you're the 20th facility and I have to drive by the other 19 facilities to get to your facility. Why would I do that? Right? You have to give me a reason. And that reason is your call center. Your marketing is going to help prep people. Your website should help prep people, right? They should be able to find that information, but maybe not. I mean, if you come off of a Google Ads, you know how much time people spend on a Google ad? Less than 5 seconds. They click the ad. What's the average amount of time they spend on a website before calling? Often 30 seconds to maybe a minute. They don't know anything about you when they're calling. So your call team is the key to successful differentiation. And so you have to train them on that. Most call teams are what we call order takers. So again, we do a lot of call center training. And what we usually hear on the phone is, hi, thanks for calling so-and-so treatment provider. How can I help? Oh, are you looking for inpatient or outpatient? Oh, are you looking for detox or PHP? Right? They ask these questions, and then if the person says yes, they take a minute. If they say no, then they say, okay, well, thanks for calling, right? Or I want to think about it. They say, okay, well, thanks, call back with any questions. They're order takers. An order taker is not going to convince me as a father to send my 17-year-old child to your facility above the other 19 facilities I could send them to, right? You've got to give me a reason. You've got to connect with me. You've got to build rapport. I have to understand your program. I have to understand why it's different. So you have to train the team on that. And it's not just training them on the differentiators of your program, it's training them on how to handle a call. Do they have program specific knowledge? Have they ever sat inside a program? Right? It's very important for them to see and know and experience what it is you actually do. Otherwise, it's going to be hard for them to talk about it. That's why sometimes having alumni as call center reps can be a huge advantage because they've been through it. They can speak to it much more clearly than someone that's been hired from the outside. The way to solve for that is to have them sit in a group, have them talk to your therapist, have them talk to patients. Again, they don't know the differentiators. Hopefully, you have them. Again, Is your program different? If it's different, does your outreach team know? Does your marketing team know? Does your call center know? Everyone has to be on the same page. Lack of skill around basic call strategies. Really common. Again, how do I lead a conversation? How do I handle obstacles, objections, concerns? How do I close a call and have the ask and lock things in? How do I build a sense of urgency on a call? These are all specific, discrete skills that a really good caller rep needs to be able to move a caller from someone that's just inquiring to avid interest to coming into your program. So leading the call is you leading the call, right? Instead of the person calling, just asking the questions and you answering them, which is an order taker. You're saying, hey, how can I help you? Tell me a little bit about what's going on. Why did you call today? Okay, so what I'm hearing is, what have you tried in the past? What do you think is going to be most helpful for you or your child or your spouse, whatever? These are leading the conversation, exploring the pain points, and then you have to make the connection between those pain points and what you as a provider do best. And so now I can really sell that solution. I can say, this is why you should come to us because I understand your pain points. We've got some rapport here. Here's how we approach this and we'll help you solve your problem vis-a-vis other competitors. That's going to get me to come into your program. So going through all of that. Locking down the ask is a big one, right? Do they build urgency? Do they really ask and say, hey, well, let's get you set up to come in. Why don't we get that scheduled? You know, what we're gonna do is we're gonna run you insurance. While we're running insurance, looks like we have a bed available tomorrow, or you can start with IOP at 6 o'clock 2 days from now. Can we get that scheduled? And if for some reason your insurance doesn't work out, I'll call you back and let you know. But pretty confident we're gonna be good here. Let's get that scheduled. We'll move forward. And your reps should also be able to make those basic assumptions, right? Whether they're using Verify TX or just really familiar with insurance, they should know more or less if that particular policies can be viable for your facility. So they should be able to move that conversation forward and really lock it down before getting off the phone. All right. Well, here on Google Ads, I've touched it a couple points, but it's just an obsession with a lot of providers. It is the single marketing channel that everyone gets obsessed with and focuses on to the detriment, I'll repeat that, to the detriment of greater strategy and other channels. It's a big problem. If you have more than 10% of your admissions coming from Google Ads, it is not sustainable for the vast majority of providers. Even if it is, it should not be your primary strategy. You need a diversified strategy because that reduces your volatility and it allows you to grow and scale. So again, we talked about that radius issue with the business development reps. The same thing happens with Google search engine optimization and Google Ads. So when I look at a Google ad, you run a radius, right? For a residential, it's going to be 150 miles. For an IOP, it's going to be a 30-mile radius. There are only so many searches for treatment in that radius in a given month. So no matter what you do, you're not going to get all of the searches and you're not going to get more searches than possibly exist. So could you expand the radius of your Google Ads campaigns? Yes. Are they going to convert once you expand them? No. Will you get some onesie twosies? Will someone from New York fly to California? Yes, it does happen. Is it going to happen consistently every month for a cost per admission that is sustainable? Absolutely not. So you need to focus your campaigns around the people that are most likely to come to your center, and that is a limited radius of individuals that exist. It's a very hard conversation I have with a lot of providers. It's a hard conversation I've had with all of the providers that we've dealt with that went bankrupt. They think that somehow magically there's just more volume there and we're simply not capturing it. And the answer is no. We've maxed out our spend. We're spending $500,000, $750,000, $1 million a month, and we're in a 150-mile radius. There is no way that there is more volume there. And we can see that, right? We have all the tools to look at the impression share, the total search volume. We know what's available. So when I tell you that there is no more volume there, there is no more volume there. Now, you can get crappier calls sometimes. You can take the soft middle, all the high intent calls. I'm looking for drug rehab near me. I'm looking for mental health therapy near me. And then we can expand to things like questions for help or concerns about suicide, right? These kind of weak terms that are unlikely to convert. If your call team's really good, maybe they can work those and maybe someone really does need help and they can convince them to come into care. But those calls are much tougher to convert and you're just going to get a bunch more crap. you're going to get a bunch of people calling for wrong numbers, a bunch of people just calling for someone else's facility. As you expand your search terms and you expand your bidding strategies and your internet extensions and all these other technical components, you get worse and worse call volume. And so a percentage of your calls are just going to be less viable. And so now your call team's got to deal with that and they got to sort through it. So anyway, all these reasons that it is not viable to rely on Google Ads because there is a limited volume within the radius of your facility in which you can potentially capture. And remember, only about 10% of people will click on an ad. 90% of people will never click on a Google ad. How often do you click on Google ads? You probably avoid them. Most people, especially those with commercial insurance, higher income, they skip all the ads. If someone's calling with Medicaid, they don't care because they know that they're going to have a hard time finding people anyway. So they just call down the line, whether it's an ad, whether it's an organic listing, they don't care. So that's one of the reasons that Medicaid calls are much higher on Google ads because people start with the Google ad. They also can't find a place to go. So they're searching 10, 15 times. They're calling a bunch of places. So it drives up the total volume of Medicaid calls, on top of the fact that those on Medicaid are struggling with addiction to a 2, 3, 4 times more than people with commercial insurance policies, depending on the level of care. So all of that factors in. But the reality is that you only get 10% of the search. And then of the people that are going to the organic listings, those are much more likely to be have, like I said, commercial insurance. About 25% of callers that call off a Google actual organic click are likely to have commercial insurance, so better volume. But still, it's limited. There's only so many searches that are occurring in a given month. So Google ads are not the answer. We talked about this already. The death spiral applies just as well to Google specifically. We spend more money on Google. It's not saving the business. Now we have less capital. We have less runway. We don't want to put a long-term plan in place. We're not willing to risk it. So let's put more money in Google. And it just spirals down. And eventually you go bankrupt because you can't save the business with Google ads. So I know I speak negatively about it, but we've just in the situation so many times, have so many conversations with you need to let go of the Google ads. We're spending $500,000 a month. Take $50,000 and let's start putting it into new channels and building those out. Let's take $20,000 and train your call team and double your conversion rates on the phone, right? There are very logical things that we need to be doing, that you should be doing, that are going to improve your overall admissions and improve it for the long term because there's no long-term value to Google ads whatsoever. The second you turn off that spend, the second the calls stop coming in. So it's a very poor investment. Google Ads also, like I said, very volatile. You'll see as much of as a 50% fluctuation month over month in terms of qualified inquiries, in terms of admissions coming in from those channels. That's not common. You're generally not going to see 50%, but it does happen and it happens consistently. And we see it within a given year, we'll see at least a 50% variance between the best month and the worst month of the year all the time. Is just part of randomness of how life works, search volume, who's doing what competitors are doing, how much they're spending, the geographies in, the reputation you have, all this stuff just drives a lot of these factors. So there's massive volatility. Usually you'll see like a 10 to maybe a 20% variance month over a month. That's pretty standard. 10 to 20% is the norm, but every once in a while you'll see these big swings. And there's obviously a seasonality component to all of this. So just be aware that Google Ads are very volatile. You can't rely on them for consistency. One of the reasons you need more channels. Talked about this already, but the obsession with weekly calls on the Google Ads. There is nothing that you're going to do in Google Ads that's going to radically change the strategy, week over week. And as I was clients, we're extremely good at running Google Ads. I can say that for a fact because I've seen everyone's campaigns. We've been on the back end of almost every provider in the country in some way, shape, or form. If we're not running it now, and we've taken over from other agencies, other teams, we are the best that there is when it comes to Google Ads. So if we're not getting it to work, it has nothing to do with a change or changes we made last week. There's nothing that we're going to change this week that is going to radically improve the ads next week. Google Ads is an important part of your strategy. You need to maximize impression share, but it has to be quality impression share. You have to manage your mix. You have to constantly, daily optimize the terms that you're searching for and what's working, what's not, because search trends change. As I said, teen rehab is on a downward trend. So if you were trying to rely on teen rehab as a primary key term, it would be working for you less and less. You need to find volume somewhere else. So Google Ads requires active management because search trends change, because competition changes, because ad costs change. There are a lot of things that drive optimization factors inside Google Ads. But week over week, is there anything that's magically changing? No. And so what you end up in is the conversations with us or with your marketing vendor, where it's like, well, why don't we just change the radius? Or maybe we need to change the key terms, or maybe it's a bidding strategy, or maybe we're just optimizing enough. And the answer is no. No, just making changes to make changes is not going to radically get you a different result when you're doing things right. I mean, do we come in on campaigns where they're a complete mess and things are way off and targeting's off and radii are off, geo targeting's off, optimization is not being done at all, the wrong keywords are in place or keywords that look good but actually aren't because we know from the back end data that they're not going to work. All these other things, can sometimes be fixed if you've got the wrong team in place. But when you got the right team, there's nothing that changes week over week that's going to radically change your life and suddenly change your admissions and fix your facility. So look at your Google Ads month over month. You want to see 10 to 20% volatility, keep it within there. Understand that sometimes there'll be big swings, usually there won't. But again, there's a diminishing returns. And you shouldn't be maxing that out. Again, going to the idea of a company that grows 20% year over year, to infinity, there's no such thing. In the same way, you can't just grow a Google Ads account to infinity. There is only so much search volume. How many people are searching for a teen rehab in a 30-mile radius around your IOP? Very small number of people. So I don't care how much money you put into that key term, you can't scale it, right? You need all of these different terms that are coming into the campaigns and actively managing those so that you can get the volume that you need, especially as you grow. And not only that, but do we not just want to expand key terms and expand audiences and radii to reasonable limits? We need to diversify into other channels, which we'll talk about next. Limited buy volume, we covered that. Large programs need more channels. So again, you only have so much search volume. And so if we grow and we expand from 50 beds to 100 beds in a given market, those patients are not going to come from more Google Ads. Yes, it worked. It worked before because it was a small enough volume and you had the bed count, you had the size and availability that fit within the current search volume of Google Ads and your business development outreach team and whatever. But now you've doubled it. And so that volume is not there for the additional beds that you need to fill. You have to go to other channels. It is the only way you're going to get in front of people. The people that are searching on Google are not the people that are hanging out on Facebook, are not the people that are watching TV. Those are different audiences. Is there overlap? Of course. Of course, there's overlap. But there are absolutely different audiences that you need to get in front of. And so we think about from a simple standpoint with Google Ads, are we getting in front of people that are searching for treatment now? Yes, that's why people like it. It's easy to do final attribution. It's likely to convert in a short time frame. Well, how many people are struggling with mental health and addiction issues that aren't searching for a center right now? The average lifespan or length of time that someone struggles with depression or anxiety before they seek treatment is 8 years. So are you going to wait 8 years for that person to search for you on Google? Or do you want to use Facebook and TV and X to get in front of them now and hopefully shorten that cycle? Or get in front of them 2 weeks before they hit that point where they had a breakdown and they absolutely need to get in treatment. If you can preempt that a little bit and get them in a little bit earlier, that helps them and it helps you. So you want to be thinking about that in terms of your overall marketing strategy. Where are my potential patients? And they're in a lot of places. They're on Facebook, they're on X, they're watching TV, they're listening to the radio. Yes, they're searching on Google. They're going to hospitals, they're talking to the private therapists. All these channels are important. And so as you grow and scale, you need to start to expand your channel strategy more and more. It reduces volatility because if, for example, Google is just having a bad month, which happens, or there's just not as many people searching on Google, which also happens, Facebook can make up for that. TV can make up for that, right? Because maybe TV has a great month. For whatever reason, sometimes things just swing up, right? Just as much as they swing down. And so you're able to handle that volatility to a much better degree if you've got a multi-channel strategy in place. Talked about a million times. Google Ads get obsessed with this obsessive short-termism. What's our admissions this week? What's our admissions this week? What was our admissions yesterday? What's our admissions today? Who cares? It's not going to change your world because there's nothing that you did yesterday that you're going to do today that is going to completely overhaul the business. But Google Ads allows you to get into it because you can get daily data, right? When we're spending $1 million a month, that is a massive amount of call volume that's coming just from Google Ads. So we can run an analysis on that and we can see what the click-through rate was. We can see what the inquiry rate was. We can see what the inquiry to admission rate was. And so it feels like we can grasp something. It feels like we can hold it. And so if we can hold it, maybe we can change it. And maybe there's some insight in this data. If we just stare at it long enough and talk about it long enough, it will release some kind of magical insight that we hadn't seen before. The answer is no. There is no magical insight in yesterday's data or today's data. Look at it month over month. That's the best way to take a look at things in terms of understanding what the value and the efficacy of your Google Ads campaigns are. Multi-channel marketing, covering this a lot. Most providers don't have any. Most providers, when we come in, they're running SEO, Google Ads, and business development. Those are the three channels the vast majority of providers run. It's okay for a smaller provider. It is manageable, especially if you have SEO and BD that will offset the high cost of your Google Ads, and you can get a reasonable blended CPA that is sustainable for even in-network providers. Totally fine. But once you start getting to scale, where you've got multiple facilities across the country, especially if you've got like 100 beds in a facility, like some providers do, you can't fill that just with search engine optimization, Google Ads, and BD. You have to start channel expansion at that point, especially if you want it to be sustainable. Again, some providers will triple up on their BD and then they're sending them, 4 states away and they're bringing in 2 admissions a month and that's all they're ever going to bring in because it's just too far for people to travel. Or they're blowing up their Google Ads budget and doing it national instead of statewide. These things happen and they get you a tiny little bit of more volume. And so people get excited about it and they're like, oh, well, if we could just, get that rep in New York to double their admissions and be the same as the ones closer to home, everything would work out. Yes, theoretically, reality, that doesn't work. So when you look at a multi-channel marketing strategy, you need a thesis behind it. So I mean, thankfully, we've been through it enough times that we're very confident that we know what channels to invest, how much to invest in them, what the leading indicators are, what our time ratios should be. But for a provider that doesn't know, they just have to say, look, Google Ads is tapped out, SEO is tapped out, and BD is tapped out for our sites. We're not going to keep working on those things, but we know that we need another channel here. Any channel that has patients that need your services is a great channel to be on. Do you have patients on Facebook? Yes, 100%. Are there patients that need your services that watch TV? Yes, 100%. So if your patients are there, there is a strategy to be delivered. You still need the right messaging strategy. You still need the right targeting and frequency strategy. Like you can't just throw things against the wall and say, okay, look, this channel is supposed to work. We should do it, right? That's not how anything works. But if you do it right, those channels will 100% deliver. Why does Google Ads work? Because patients search on it. Why does business development work? Because business development talks to community referrals that have patients that need your services. So why does Facebook work? Why does TV work? Because there are people that use Facebook and watch TV that need your services. It's different, right? They don't need it right now. You're more education, you're more reputation building, you're more nurturing them along a decision-making cycle. So it's a different strategy. It's also a different call because these people are not searching in crisis. They're calling you after carefully evaluating 3 to 4 to 5 other providers, and now they need to make a decision. And so your call team has to sell them on the phone. So lots of different factors that come into play, and these are learning elements for the organization. You survived off of crisis calls on Google Ads and business development referrals. Great. That skill set that your call team has will not transfer to once the Facebook calls and the TV calls start coming in, because those people are going to be more discerning. They're going to be evaluating multiple providers. They're not going to be in crisis most of the time. So that's one of these scale elements that I'm talking about that have a big effect on providers' ability to grow and scale. Lack of differentiation, I just bring that up every single screen because it is the single most important thing in terms of success. If you are doing the same thing as everyone else around you in the radius in which you serve, you will struggle. Doesn't mean that you can't really try and get better at marketing so that you capture more of the search volume than your competitor. Is that going to help you a bit? Yeah, it will. And that's why you need a good marketing company or a good marketing team. But it's not going to save your business. If you're not different than the other 19 providers in your similar market, great marketing will not save anything. It will help a great provider be better. It is not going to save a mediocre provider most of the time. Maybe you can tread water, you know. A lot of providers focus on fluff and exaggeration, right? This, we're the best treatment program in Indiana, or, you know, highest rated trauma. And they just make stuff up, right? That doesn't work. People see through that. People actually see and find it's really shady. Consumers actually, we've done studies on it. And when you look at superlative, like saying we're the best or we're the greatest, consumers by default actually trust that less. So it's a very ineffective strategy. So you want to focus on your differentiators, but they want to be real, they want to be honest, and they want to be realistic. If you are the best at something, like you won the Newsweek award, great, use that, right? Super valuable. If you didn't win a Newsweek award and no one else is telling you you're the best, don't say you're the best. If you have gotten that from Newsweek, make sure that you're referencing it. Say, hey, voted by Newsweek. Don't just say, hey, we're the best treatment program in XYZ area. They voted by Newsweek as the best. That gives people a reference point. It gives people backup. It gives people something they can search and validate. Really, really important. Another huge problem that providers has is they try and drop a call all the time. How many of you go on Facebook and call off a new car ad, or decide to see or ad for Tide, stop everything you're doing, go to the store and go buy some Tide? Nobody does that. So why do you think that they would do that for you for behavioral health services? They don't. Nobody does it. So don't tell people to call now, because that's not why they're on Facebook. That's not why they're watching TV. You know, you can work people through a nurturing cycle if you sequence it right and do your retargeting, or you think about your messaging sequence strategy on your TV campaigns right. You can get to a point where you can start driving the call. But the reality is that these campaigns are not set to drive calls, and people just find them annoying. We had a really large provider that when we first took their stuff over, they were running all these call now campaigns on Facebook, and they were upset that Facebook doesn't work. It's a terrible channel. Right, because you were trying to get people to call off your ad. And all your ad said was, do you need addiction treatment? Call us now. Nobody's going to call off of that. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're better. There's 19 other competitors around here. The competitors that have been in the community much longer that I am familiar with, right? There's a lot that has to happen on Facebook from an educational and a nurturing standpoint before you can ask for a call. So really, really important to understand that other channels are not Google ads, because I didn't go to Google. All right, sorry, I went to Google because I need treatment now. That's why I went to Google. That's why I searched, and that's why I clicked your ad, and that's why I clicked your organic link. I did not go to Facebook. I'm not watching TV to do the same thing. You absolutely cannot use the same strategy. In fact, it will be a turnoff, and people will start just to see you as basically a provider that just wants admissions, right? Not someone that really cares, not someone that really knows anything about them or knows how to deliver good care. They think you're just a business trying to grow revenue. That's not how you want to come. Talked about this before, business development. The same thing, we want to integrate with the call center. We want the call team to know what we're doing, and we absolutely want to be integrated with clinical. One of the most important things that we do is every single onboarding call we have a client, we bring on the clinical director or the lead clinical person, so we understand what's different about that provider. What do you do well that other providers don't in your competitive area? Really, really important. So clinical is the core for everything. We are just communicating those effectively optimized to the right people at the lowest cost, at the right frequency, with the right messaging, right? That's our job, but we have to know what that is, and we can't just make it up, and it can't be buzzwords on the website. Really, really important. Here's a map I mentioned in the beginning. So this is an example of, this was Hollywood. So Hollywood in California. But if you pull up a map of Chicago, of Atlanta, of suburbs in Chicago, of Indianapolis, of suburbs in Indianapolis, you get the exact same thing. There are just literally providers. You can walk outside your house, throw a stone, and you're going to hit 1 to 2 providers. How do you compete in that world? This is a mature market. This is not an immature market where there is more demand than there is supply. We have more supply than there is demand, and it's been that way for years. And we still get new companies opening up all the time calling us. I love that. I love that people want to help. I love that people want to build these businesses and help other people. But you need to be intentional about that and say, does it make sense for me to open up here? Because there's 19 other competitors in the area. What am I going to do different to make sense for me to compete against all these established providers that have established relationships, that have good SEO and are already ranking, that know how to run good campaigns, that have a trained call team, right? How am I going to compete with that? You have to think of something different and something special. And so I always tell providers to really think through that. And for our largest providers and clients, it's also one of the biggest challenges. It would be one of the number one reasons that most of them failed because there was nothing special about them. They grew up in an immature market where there was high demand, low supply. They were able to successfully navigate that. They were able to run marketing a little bit better. Nowadays, you have to be really, really good at marketing like us to be able to compete. If you're just trying to do it with like some in-house team or some local agency, lots of people are running that stuff. There's no way you're going to do any better from a marketing standpoint. Then in terms of your outreach, in terms of your messaging, in terms of your call center, in terms of your ability to attract patients and attract community referral partners, if you're doing the same thing as everyone else, again, nobody cares. I've been working with X treatment center as a referral partner for 5 years. You open up shop yesterday and you start talking to me. Why am I going to refer to you versus this person I've been referring to for 5 years? Just not. Even from a simple Google Ads standpoint, I mean, you know who does the best with Google Ads among all their clients? The ones that have a great reputation in the area. And why? Because people don't really think about it. You kind of think that marketing is a situation where people will remember you and search for you in their time of need. That doesn't happen nearly as often as we would like it to. What does happen is they do a Google search for addiction treatment near me, depression treatment near me, therapy for my team. And then they'll see your name and they go, oh, I've heard about those guys. I've heard good things. And so then they'll click on your ad versus your competitors. And not only that, but now they're calling in with a higher intent, right? So they're a higher qualified lead than if they didn't know you. That's extremely valuable. And we see it in our data. When you have a good reputation, you get more Google Ads calls at a lower cost and at a higher quality than if you have no reputation in the area. And we've seen it specifically with providers that have expanded. So in one market, they're killing it. They do extremely well. Our Google Ads CPAs are phenomenal. And then they open up in a brand new market and things just tank, right? They cannot get the same CPAs that they could before because it's a new market, because no one knows who you are. You've got no online reputation. Most people see a Google ad and they still look at your online reputation before they call. So if you get zero right reviews or you got one review and your competition in your area has 50 reviews and they're mostly 4 or 5 stars, I'm going to call there. I'm not going to call the new provider in town. So I don't know anything about them. I don't trust them. They don't have a reputation I can get behind. Whereas in the established market, they do. So these are really important factors. So when we're looking at clinical differentiation, I know this is hard. This is hard for investors. It's hard for the executive teams. A lot of people haven't actually thought about it. There is no vision from the clinical standpoint, but there has to be. How are you going to be clinically different? And you really got to dig into this. It's not, oh, well, we're dual diagnosis, or we're evidence based, or people really care. These are general platitudes and buzzwords that everyone says, and everyone says that they do. And so it's okay if you actually do the best CBT or the best trauma therapy, and that's the term you want to use, even if it's a buzzword, if you truly do it to a superior level. But now you're going to figure out how do you do it better than everyone else? Like, what is it about what you're doing that's better than the other 19 centers that are providing trauma informed care? And then how do you communicate that accurately? Like, how do you convince other people? Because it doesn't matter if you do it better if no one really understands that you do it better. Like, you have to actually be able to communicate and convince that, which is where we come in. So we help clients with those kind of things all the time, but there has to be the reality that's there. We can't make it up. And so the executive team, ownership, investors have to have a clear vision of what their care delivery strategy is that's better or differentiated in some way than the 19 other competitors you can see on the map there. Most people don't invest in budget or they don't invest budget or even have one for clinical or for clinical training. Big problem, obviously. Like I said, you have to train your call team, you have to train your business development team, you have to train everyone else in the company. Most clinicians, for better or worse, just learned a lot of theory in school. And they did a little bit of supervision, but they did supervision under someone that just learned a lot of theory in school. So their ability to deliver a specific kind of care is often limited. There's huge opportunities to provide training. And if you look at the research and the data on this, it's the same thing. A lot of clinicians just kind of hit the middle of the road in terms of patient outcomes. They need deliberate practice and ongoing feedback with specific training to be able to improve and deliver better outcomes for patients. So if you don't have a budget for training, how do you expect to be differentiated? Even if you say, okay, we're the best trauma-informed care program in the country, well, how does the new clinician you hired become that? They're just not automatically going to magically fit in and fit your vision. You've got to have a system and a process for training new people on that system and the vision so that they truly are delivering the differentiated care promise that you're putting out into the community. There needs to be a budget for onboarding. There needs to be a budget for ongoing training. You need standardization in there. Again, how do you validate and confirm and make sure that they're delivering this very specific, better version of trauma-informed care that's very effective based on hopefully everything that you've been able to work through with your clinical team. That has to be built in. And so that's your curriculum. Do you have a curriculum? Is it followed? When there's variance from it or deviation from it, is there a clear reason for it that fits in with the way that you guys approach and deliver care? Very, very important stuff. Performance and KPIs. Most clinicians have none. Most people aren't doing outcomes tracking. The most common KPI I see is productivity, which is an important one from a financial standpoint. But what about how they're delivering care and the way they deliver care? At the end of the day, what does good look like? Super, super important. I ask this question of every therapist we talk to, every clinical director we talk to, every provider we talk to. What does good look like? And if you don't have a definition of what good looks like, well, then how in the world could your clinical team know what they should or shouldn't be doing? How can they possibly improve if there's not a framework for what good looks like? There's not specific actions they can take. There's not specific things that they can try to get better at. You have to know what good looks like, and those should be KPI in terms of ongoing supervision and feedback loops within the clinical team. They absolutely need it. Patient outcomes tracking is the best. You should absolutely have patient outcome tracking in place. Very easy to do. There's a lot of vendors out there. There's a lot of providers. They do it for you. But you have to make the commitment to bring it in, to pay for it, and then to regularly make sure that your team is using it effectively. And those are all challenges. Those are all easier said than done, but they really need to be part of any provider that's trying to improve the quality of care and create differentiation in the marketplace. Because if we look at these 20 providers showing up on the Google Maps screen here, most of them are going to be gone, right? Half of them will probably be closed within 12 months. So maybe that's an opportunity, right? Maybe we'll say, oh, maybe we can just hold on long enough. These other guys will disappear. I've heard that as a strategy. I don't consider it a great one. I think a much better strategy is saying, how do we become the best at what we do and become known for that and market it and communicate it appropriately so that we become the go-to provider in this community. And then that gets all the people coming to us and not going to competitors in the marketplace. Sometimes there's a sense of, hey, we're all in this together, and there's enough patients for everyone to kind of grow. And that's not really true. If you have a bunch of 6 beds, somewhere, yeah, technically there's probably enough for 26 beds to survive. But when we're starting to talk about 100-bed facilities, even 50-bed facilities, and having a bunch of them, and then having IOPs every 20 feet, there aren't enough people that need care in a given month to support all of those different providers. There will be winners and there will be losers. And so if you want to be here tomorrow as well as today, you better find what's different about you, get really good at it, and then start communicating it. And wrap this up with the answers, or the answer isn't in spreadsheets. This is something that we deal with a lot of private equity firms, a lot of executives. Again, kind of going back to the Google Ads example, they're staring at the data, right? Look, yesterday we had 25 admissions, and today we only have 8. What changed between yesterday? Nothing, nothing. It's just random volatility. Maybe there was a bunch of flukes that came together, and they all just had a bad day. But most of it will correct itself tomorrow. You'll end up with an average day. It's usually what happens. So the answer is not in the spreadsheets. It's not in the numbers. Data can identify problems. It can't solve them. And part of the challenge is that as you grow, or if you get into one of these downward spiral loops, what worked for you before is not the answer going forward. So your previous data cannot provide you guidance. Also, data tends to be very short term. If you've been around a long time and you've been through a lot of seasonality and you really track and there's consistency in apples to apples across the board, you can compare year over year and then start to identify maybe areas that are falling down. Or if I know, look, our CPAs were great all of last year during this time and the year before that this time. This year they're starting to drop. Now I can start to troubleshoot. Is there a problem with marketing? Is there a problem with the call center? Is there a problem with business development? Like what's going on? And we can compare those apples to apples. But the reality is that most providers don't have that data, or there's reasons why it's apples to oranges because the business development team was twice the size, or there was a different leader in place, or you had some reputation issues this year that you didn't have last year. Lots of things that factor into all this stuff. So most of the time, the previous data can provide you a bit of directionality. You should always be looking at your data. The data is always the starting point. Obviously, super important, but it's not going to solve your problem for you, and it's not going to give you that long-term vision. So think about it, right? We went from 100 beds to 300 beds. Somehow we survived off of just Google Ads, SEO, and business development. But we know that's not going to scale, or at least I'm telling you that that's not going to scale. So we have to add on a new channel. Well, how is your previous data going to help you decide what channel to invest in, how much to invest, how often to invest, what the frequency should be, what messaging should be, what audience targeting should be? Like, right, you don't know any of that stuff because you don't have the data for it. What got you here is not going to get you there. So start with your data. It's a great place to be, but it's not going to solve your problems. A lot of issues with garbage in, garbage out. A lot of times when we dig into data, it's completely off. And I can't tell you how many times we've gone into a provider and Google Ads, great example here too. People are like, oh yeah, we've got this great CPA, and we go look at it, and it's complete garbage because you were triple counting conversions, or you weren't feeding the field right from call tracking metrics in the Salesforce, or the call team was mistaking things, or just not taking things, or your CMO was randomly taking it because the call team wasn't taking it. Tons of stuff. I've seen it all. But there's garbage in, garbage out. Even something simple like maybe you had an internal team running a bunch of brand keywords. And so they were running Google Ads campaigns with a $10,000 a month budget to your brand. Well, those are going to convert, and they're going to convert really well because they were searching for you already. They wanted to go to you. They actually looked up your name and they said, hey, I might as well click on the ad rather than scroll down the page and try to find these guys. And those convert at a great rate. And so Google Ads looks phenomenal. We've seen that pretty often. Never seen it be a whole budget, but we've seen 30% of the budget going to brand search sometimes. And so things look great. But the reality is that you have gotten those calls 99% of the time anyway. And so you're just wasting budget. That budget should have gone to the people that weren't already looking for you. So garbage in, garbage out the data, pretty standard. As I mentioned, data can't set a long-term strategy. If you didn't run Facebook ads before, it's not going to tell you anything. If the Google trend dynamic changed and you were doing really well with 2 or 3 ad groups, and now that trend volume is down, and so there isn't that search volume anymore, that past data is not going to help you adjust your campaigns for today. You've got to look at something else. You've got to try something else. The business development team was doing really well, but you're at your max radius. You've got your territory maxed out. You can't fit any more reps in there so that they won't trip over each other. So hiring another rep is not the answer, even though that worked for you, the previous 9 reps you hired. You went from 1 to 10 every single time. That was a good move. That was a smart move. The data said hire more reps because reps work. But then now you're at 10, 11 reps isn't going to be any better. So data doesn't set long-term strategy. You have to have a vision around it. You have to really think through it. Nothing scales to the moon, as I said. Can't just pour money into. We've had providers tell us like, oh, teen rehab converted this week really well. We should just put all the money in teen rehab. There's not that many searches for teen rehab, and again, you need calls and admissions coming from everywhere, not just from one particular key term. Nothing scales to the moon. Different stages of growth require different strategies, as we've been talking about. What worked yesterday isn't going to work today necessarily. So hopefully that really provided you a lot of information and guidance around, hey, are we actually locking ourselves into a downward spiral here? Have we identified these red flags of being really focused on high pressure, short-term results and making bad decisions? Are we using irrelevant data, or are we looking at a past that doesn't apply to now and making decisions off of it? And how do we get out of this spiral? And we get out of this spiral by a little bit gutsy sometimes, having really difficult conversations with teams, making longer term investments that are scary, that are requiring time and commitment and risk. But these are the realities of life and business. And again, like when we look at things like that, we know that this particular direction, let's say we're going to add on Facebook and TV, those have huge high probabilities of success. Doesn't mean it'll work perfectly in every market, but it's going to work. And it's going to work better and better, especially as you learn from it and say, okay, the Dallas market is a little bit different than the Las Vegas market, which is a little bit different than from the Chicago market. But you figure those nuances out as you get into it, just like you had to figure out different reimbursement environments as you moved into different states. It's the same thing. There's a learning process to all of it. It's never going to work on a dime. Nothing's going to fix itself tomorrow. But we've seen it work again and again with clients. We have clients ask us, for example, it's like, well, how do you know Facebook's going to work? Because every single client that we run Facebook with, within 3 to 6 months, they have more admissions. But you can't see the call data. You never will. People don't call off Facebook. It's not how that works. Do we have more admissions? Do we have more calls? Yes. Then what are we so worried about here, right? Of course, the challenge comes in because there's fluctuation. Maybe you start a Facebook campaign and you start it in February, and then you get to the summer, and the summer has this traditional lull, especially with teen programming. And so, right when those Facebook campaigns should be hitting, you're actually seeing a drop, and now everyone's concerned, stuff like that. It happens, but the reality is you don't have another option. There's no more room in BD. There's no more room in Google Ads. There's no room in Google Search. You have to diversify your channel strategy to grow. You have to figure it out. The audience is there. It works time and time again with other providers that are just like you or close to you. You need to make those strategic decisions that are a little bit of a riskier bet. Don't get into the short termism. Don't get obsessed with your past data because it's not always accurate. Really think about differentiation. Really think about training your teams. And if you do all this stuff right, you will be able to pull yourself out of the downward spiral and you will be successful because we have tons of successful clients. We have more successful clients than we do have failures. But I think the failures that we reviewed today and that apply to a lot of different providers are very instructive. And so I hope that was helpful. If you have questions, if you want to talk through this stuff, I'm always happy to help. Obviously, we've got a 40-person marketing team that can help you execute on all of this. We have a consulting wing where we do call center training, business development training, ops overviews, financial stability assessments, marketing assessments. If you need help in any of those areas, please feel free to reach out to me personally through LinkedIn, or you can contact the company at the information on the screen. So appreciate your time. Have a good day.